Hi, this is an excerpt of a live webinar that was filmed on the 6th of June 2023. Therefore, the contents of this video are applicable from that date, and of course things may well have changed since then. This first excerpt is an introduction to the Building Safety Act and the Building Safety Regulator. So where did all of this come from? Obviously, we had the Grenfell tragedy, and some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Hackett report, the Building a Safer Future report, which really set out, it's a very long time ago now, actually it's 2018, set out a roadmap for improving building safety for buildings of all sizes and all building types. And then alongside that, a further piece of work was done in 2020 about setting the bar, and that is really, about competence in the industry. So these two very high-level foundation reports about driving change and fire safety have been a real catalyst for changing legislation that has come in the years to follow. So out of the Building Safety Act comes the Building Safety Regulator, which will be referred to as the BSR, which has been a big buzzword, which I'm sure all of you have heard. This is now established and was established through the Building Safety Bill and from the Building Safety Act. And it really has three main core functions. First of all, overseeing the safety and performance of buildings. Secondly, helping and encouraging the built environment industry and building control professionals to improve their competence. And lastly, leading the implementation of a new regulatory framework for high-rise buildings. So the HSC has morphed into the building control regime in the guise of the Building Safety Regulator. And I think it's particularly important to note at this stage that BSR has an impact on all types of buildings. So everything from a loft conversion to a tower block is under the review as a higher level of the BSR. There was appointed a Chief Inspector of Buildings. Unfortunately, he's now retired, so that post has now become vacant. Not one or me or Joe fancy putting our hat in the ring for, but there will be a Chief Inspector of Buildings in post to overview the building safety regime of the entire industry. But the BSR itself will also become a building control body, and this is completely new. And the BSR will become the only building control body for what we call high-risk buildings, which are high-risk residential buildings. These are buildings with 7 or more stories, and the finished floor level is at least 18 metres high, which contain either 2 residential units or hospital, care home or student accommodation that is over 18 metres with sleeping accommodation. It's very important. So a big work stream of this, apart from the safety framework itself, is about competence. And the Setting the Bar report set up a new competence regime for the entire construction industry. And I'm sure all of you are already sick to death of having competence in all its guises rammed down your throats. It is a real big revolution in the construction industry, and it's affected us as building control. A huge amount of work is going in for us. Me and Joe have probably got some exams to do, some reports to write, to demonstrate that we're competent to be an experienced building control professional. And there'll be RBIs 1, 2 and 3 levels that we have to satisfy to demonstrate our competence. But what they've done is they've set up working groups across every possible sector of the industry to look at what is competence, what does competence mean, and how does each individual sector of the industry demonstrate their competence to say, yeah, actually, I'm competent to operate in my field for a high-rise building or a complex hospital building or a school building or even a domestic residential project. So demonstrating competence is a very important thing for us all, and this work is enormous with all of these working groups. There's thousands of people involved in this, and this is going to take several years to really come into fruition at different paces across the industry. So the Building Safety Act itself, this is an enormous, hefty piece of legislation, enormously detailed and actually quite impenetrable to get through. It's broken down into parts, but we're not even going to dive into all of these parts today. It is an enormous piece of legislation and has led to the publishing in tranches of several other pieces of legislation. The main part we're going to focus on today is probably bits of part 2, as in the new regulator and its functions. Bits of part 3, how the Building Act itself has been amended for the new building control system. And part 4, higher risk buildings and the new regime for building control approval of those higher risk buildings. But the Act itself is very much an overarching piece of legislation. Following that is a whole tranche of secondary legislation, which are the pieces of legislation that actually tell us and you guys what we're all going to need to do. So there's been a huge amount of consultations published, lots of which are now completed, and you can look at those on the DLUC consultation site and actually see some of the feedback from those consultations as well. But we're a long way from it all being published and it all being finished. So we're hoping that by the summer recess of Parliament, we should get through the secondary legislation. And I think it's also important to note there is a whole host of other legislation that interacts with this. So the Responsible Actors legislation, the Fire Safety Act revisions, the Fire Safety England regulations, and other legislation as well, which all interplays with improving fire safety in buildings and also regulatory control of higher risk buildings. And there's also a lot of guidance and the start of competency guidance for us building control surveyors and operational standard rules for building control approvers, which is what we're going to become. And I think that's important language for you guys that you're going to see within the industry. The term approved inspector, which we've been from a long time since the industry first started in private sector building control, will change to register building control approvers. That will be the new term for an approved inspector, and us as individuals will be known as registered building inspectors. So there's a lot of secondary legislation still to come and a lot of consultations that are still being processed by government that's going to lay out the framework for the way that we move forward. So here we are, the timetable, the famous roadmap slide. And I think it's important to say that this really is an ambition of government to hit these deadlines. And on the whole, the industry has hit these deadlines. So I think we should probably take this as read. You know, lots of this is already set out in legislation, that these milestones are going to be hit. The big date coming up is, of course, October this year. And that is why the industry has really started to speed up on gearing up for the changes, including our good selves in the building control industry. And some key things happen in October, particularly the implementation of the new process for higher risk buildings over 18 metres, which I will talk about, and also the start of change for us in the building control industry, amongst a whole host of other things. The next key date is really April 2024, when the transition of some of those changes will be completed. And really, midway through 24, the new system is pretty much going to be functioning in all forms, in all of the sort of sectors and disciplines that we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to hand you over to Joe now, who's going to talk for a short while on design of construction of non-higher risk buildings.
Thank you very much, Andy. Yeah, I'm going to give you